I extend a warm welcome to etcfo.com. My name is Manu, and in this special series, Future of Compliance, we bring to you this exclusive fireside chat on how market leaders can navigate compliance. Viewers, before we quickly start with this fireside chat, we all know that compliance is the center of the rules and regulations. In fact, it is the company's most important line of defense. A proper compliance system, no doubt, supports CFOs to maintain internal checks and balances and improve overall corporate governance. But viewers, when the rules and the regulations are changing quite frequently, then how should CFOs navigate? How should they take the right decisions? What best they can do with digitization then? Well, to answer these questions comprehensively and clearly, in this fireside chat, we are joined by two industry experts, Mr. Pulkit Goyal, CFO and member of the board, ThyssenKrupp Industries India. Hi, Pulkit.
Hello.
And we have with us Ms. Preeti Khorana, Director of Advocacy and Regulation here. Hi, Preeti.
Hi, thanks.
So I want to quickly start this discussion, this fireside chat with Pulkit. Pulkit, I mean, could you just quickly take us through in terms of how the CFOs or the market leaders can navigate compliance when the rules and the regulations of the game are changing quite frequently? Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Manu, for having me here, and also thanks a lot to etcfo.com. It's my first interaction, so I'm really very much excited to participate, and of course interact with other industry leaders like Preeti and of course you, Manu. Thanks once again. So compliance. I mean, I know it's not an easy subject, but for me, if you ask me to answer this question, I would start first by saying that before we get into how do we navigate compliance, the most important thing to have is a robust and a strong and a mature compliance strategy. What does that compliance strategy mean? For me, that compliance strategy means, like any other organization, like any other CFO or CEO, the target of that compliance strategy is to minimize the risk. But how do you get there? And for that, personally, in my professional and private life, I start with the 7 principles of compliance. To get there, to get to that minimization of compliance risk. What are those 7 principles? For me, the first one is having a clear target picture, which is so well integrated with the business processes. The entire compliance has to be fully integrated with the business processes. Number 1. Number 2, the culture of compliance has to be sustainable. It cannot be lived by transaction. It cannot be lived by topic. It has to be embedded and has to be sustainable in each and everything that we do. The third thing, which most of us forget, even as CFOs, to have a compliance organization which is adding value to the businesses, not blocking the transactions, not restricting what we are doing, not constraining our businesses. This is, for me, I would say, one of the most important principles out of those 7 principles. The fourth one, having maximum penetration. Compliance message has to go to each and everybody in the organization. It cannot just be lived by the board members, CFO, CEO, or key managerial person. We have to make sure that message reaches out to each and everyone. And the fifth one is personal commitment. Everybody in the organization has to feel committed to that compliance culture. Else, all the compliance commitments are bound to fail. So we have to make sure that each and everybody is understanding and feel accountable for that compliance commitment and the compliance culture. Sixth one is the compliance strategy has to be comprehensive, flexible, and dynamic. It cannot be prepared in a way which is set on stone. It has to be comprehensive, flexible, and dynamic. I mean, let's take a look at the COVID-19. I mean, I think nobody ever thought 2 years ago that we'll be hit by such a situation. So we need to make sure that these 3 principles, sub-principles are also applying. And the last one, the approach of compliance has to be practical and solution oriented. It cannot tell me, and I tell this to all my legal and compliance colleagues all the time, don't tell me, don't take this step. Tell me, how can I take that step with minimum risk? And once you have these principles clear, I can tell you the navigating compliance would be far more easy. And personally, I follow this approach in all the organizations I have worked in the last 16 years of my professional experience. And based on this, I frame my compliance framework.
Well, that is a very comprehensive start to the question on approaching and navigating this regulatory environment, which is changing frequently. So before I mean, if in fact I would like to jump to Preeti. So Preeti, if you could just have your quick initial thoughts on how the leaders should approach, the compliance and please.
First of all, thank you for having me. And I think Pulkit gave a very nice macro framework that all CFOs, all businesses must adopt in order to really truly understand their risks and how they should approach compliance. So that's very wonderfully put together. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk about like a little bit around how our regulator has changed significantly over the past few years, and we have seen that there is rising dependence on technology across the globe, not just India, and India has actually kept up with that kind of pace. So, so in that sense, I feel like compliance and technology now are very interestingly intertwined, and that's a kind of a situation that we are all interested in. That how we can harness technology to improve our compliance, to reduce our risks. I think that's also an important piece around that. So we see compliance as very closely interlinked to technology.
Okay, that's a great add-on to what Pulkit was saying. Pulkit, let me quickly come to you. I think if I'm not wrong, the second principle of that was culture in the 7 principles. So if you could just throw a bit more light, go deeper, how one can build and establish a strong culture in the organization. Yeah.
Thanks. That's another very interesting question and close to my heart. Compliance culture, and as you rightly said, the number 2 point of those compliance principles can only be built when you have a commitment and a cultural understanding of the values that the organization has and how that can be done. One has to constantly communicate and set the tone from the top. And if I can give a recent example, and again, that goes back to one of the 7 principles where I said maximum penetration. We were always struggling with this question. I mean, I understand compliance. My colleagues in the management committee understand the compliance. Is this understanding reaching across every level? I mean, we have 2,000 plus employees on our permanent role, and also another 5,000 plus workers who are working through subcontracting. During the International Anti-Corruption Day campaign, we came up with a very unique campaign to reach out to everyone. That was fortune cookies. We wrote down those 7 important compliance messages and rolled that up, hide them inside those fortune cookies and send them to all the colleagues and partners who were really taken by surprise when we had introduced that IACD Day live. And at that point in time, everybody had those cookies in their hand. And when they opened it, and they had a very nice compliance message written inside. And if I just quote a few, it is my responsibility as an employee that I understand the risk of being non-compliant. Number 2, I understand that if there is any non-compliant behavior, I can reach out without any fear to my legal and compliance department. And I'll tell you something, though it actually surpassed even my expectations, but the impact was immense. many colleagues sent out their pictures and the videos and the emails and the chat messages. This is how we never expected that this is what really compliance mean to you. I mean, we always understood, but we never knew that it is so significant. And some of them kept very nicely that message in their wallets. So it was quite heart felt, I would say, for me, that entire thing. So why I'm giving that example to you is that, the culture is not right or wrong. I mean, we need to pick up those important cultural elements and see that, yes, like in the organization where I am, I think that's the way probably we could have reached to each and every colleague, because we have a multi-location administration. We have barely, I would say, approximately 30% of our entire employee base, which is working in the headquarters. Rest all are sitting at different site locations. So we need to pick up those cultural elements, setting clearly the tone from the top and letting them know that we are here. You have to feel responsible for your action, but don't fear. We have a clear speak up culture, and you can reach out to us without any fear.
Okay. Tone from the top is very crucial, as you are highlighting and stressing as a CFO for the business and market leaders. Priti, you mentioned in the very beginning about the importance of technology in compliance. But when the rules are changing so frequently, like how one can use digitization to unlock, the seamless systems today you bring to adapt to the current regulatory framework.
Definitely, before I begin, I just want to congratulate Pulkit, because that sounds like an excellent, organization-wide compliance framework that they put together, and I'm sure every employee felt involved in the process, and that's just a great way to feel, make people feel involved and a part of that entire compliance journey. So, great on that. Sort of like you asked, just focusing on digitization as an aspect of compliance. Now, I'm sure Pulkit will agree that one of the clear mandates for digitization is to enable CFOs to be able to take, decision, like offer them decision support, which is based on real-time data, which is based on data-enabled frameworks where CFO is able to take difficult decisions. I think that's truly the mandate for digitization. Now, ideally, a CFO would want to, digitize a large part of their organization, their processes. But as you rightly said, that our regulator has been changing significantly. So what we are observing is that there's fast change in the regulatory environment, and in fact, there have people actually say that there have been so many notifications and changes, especially with respect to GST, that it's nearly impossible to keep up. Now, when you ask me the question around, how we can keep up with that kind of pace of reform, I think essentially when you talk very sort of in a focused manner about technology and compliance, there are roughly, say, four aspects to this, I would say. The first one definitely would be using cloud-based technology and using some amount of AI in the kind of tools that you use to comply. So that's the first aspect. The second would be, being able to automate a large number of forms that you submit to the regulator, which actually focuses on minimizing your regulatory risk. So you take care of, all kinds of submissions that you do. The other that we are noticing is that a lot of CFOs have now started to focus on a new term, which they've coined as tax optimization. So it's not just about being compliant and using automation to prepare your forms and to submit your forms. It's also about being able to optimize how you do your taxes. Now, when we talk about optimization, I think it's time to sort of dig slightly deeper into, how we do our GST compliance. And, very broadly and loosely speaking, a large part of how we do our indirect taxes and compliance is dependent upon our vendors. So in that sense, I feel that, when we talk about digitization, when we talk about compliance, and we talk about tax optimization, it's important to truly understand what is the impact that compliance or non-compliance has on regular business metrics. Like when you're talking about business, is it blocking or unblocking your working capital? I think those kind of discussions have actually really begun to take place. The other thing is that as a CFO for large group, I'm sure you would benefit greatly from receiving clear insights into where are the potential risks, how those can be mitigated, and having a feeling that you're able to sort of reduce the risks of notices and demands and all of that. So in that sense, with these four aspects, in the sense, firstly, automating how you do compliance, automating how you do your submissions, and how you're receiving and submitting your reports, then around bringing focus to tax optimization, and then lastly, having great deal and great amount of insights into what your data is telling you. I think these four things broadly encompass how we think about technology.
Well, that is very nicely and comprehensively put, Preeti, I must say. Pulkit, do you want to add on the technology layer, CFOs, technology, regulation? I mean, how one can, sort of ensure that the regulation is complied with adequately, through technology?
I mean, I cannot agree more with what Preeti has said. Though we have a very nice compliance culture, compliance strategy, and a compliance framework as well. But let me tell you, I mean, in the end, we all are human beings. I mean, so normally, in my experience, there are typically 5 challenges that I've seen, and I fully agree. Those 5 challenges can only be addressed by RegTech. I think that's how you call it, regulatory technology companies. Now, what are those 5 challenges? The first thing is that is our compliance framework or compliance strategy really updated? Though I say that one of the principles is that it has to be dynamic, comprehensive, and also flexible. But is it really updated? I mean, there has to be some system which alerts us to say, look, take a look at it. Is it really keeping up to the time? So that's one challenge which we face, and we are always asking this question to ourselves. Number 2, is there any human intervention which may cause, or a human error which may cause a non-compliance inadvertently? How do we kind of plug it? I mean, as she also rightly mentioned, laws are changing all the time. Sometimes we are not aware we were supposed to comply with a particular regulation and we inadvertently missed it. So how do we do that? And from my perspective, this is the second challenge which most of the CFOs face, including I. Third one, how cross-functional integrations and interactions are taking place. For example, I may have from finance perspective or commercial perspective certain view on the compliance, while HR department or OSH, occupational safety and health department may have a different perspective. To our project team may have a different perspective. Are we talking to each other? Are we integrating our approach towards the compliance? This may sometimes also lead to neglecting, because OSH may think, oh, I thought HR is taking care of it, and HR thinks, oh, I thought finance is taking care of it. And second thing that we may notice is this could be sometimes duplication in the compliances. So that's the fourth challenge which I normally observe, and where RegTech companies can help a lot. And the fifth one, the new forms of risk that are emerging. And again, the best example in front of us is COVID-19. I think none of us imagined, approximately 20 months ago that we'll be hit by such a pandemic, and none of us were prepared. So I feel that in these 5 areas, definitely RegTech companies can help us a lot, help CFOs to improve their existing compliance processes.
That is very nicely put again, Pulkit. So, Preeti, how do you view the RegTech culture as Pulkit to light upon? And what's the feedback you have got from the companies in the entire pandemic so far? How are they looking at you?
So I agree. I completely agree here on this point, and I think Pulkit's fears are not unfounded. Whenever we talk about intervention of inclusion of various departments, various people. There is definitely some amount of risk. There may not be a clear understanding. We may not be up to date if the regulator is ahead of us, which I think is quite true in our context, in India's context today. There may be a constant fear of whether we are up to date, are we adapting changes fast enough. So definitely that's the premise. And then, before I talk about regtech, I just want to sort of demystify it. Like, it definitely sounds like a great buzzword, and it's being heard pretty often, but it basically means, regulatory technology. So it's sort of an acronym for regulatory technologies. Very, very simply saying, it's kind of, it reflects how there are certain group of companies, and mostly startups or new age companies, who are now focusing on two big things. Now, the first one is cloud computing. So cloud computing has just sort of overhauled the way we do business, and also big data. So these are the companies who focus on these two aspects, cloud computing and big data. Now, to be able to truly understand what a regtech can do for you, I think it can be nicely understood in the context of banks. So when you talk about banks, you're talking about a large entity which is dealing with multiple customers, perhaps multiple regulators, and dealing with changing regulations, and there is risk of fraud, and there are various other aspects that you need to be mindful of. With the help of regtech companies, you're able to promise to your entire ecosystem a certain amount of flexibility in terms of adapting to more easily adapting to change, accuracy, because you understand technology, you know what kind of changes it can bring about, and you're talking about high amount of responsiveness. I think another way to understand that is how UPI payments have completely changed the way we do business. So it's completely overhauled. I'm sure the three of us and probably all our listeners and most of the people we know have used UPI in some format. And I feel the kind of revolution that UPI has brought to payments, to business payments. Similarly, we'll see that kind of revolution happening with e-invoicing. So when you talk about e-invoicing, you're talking about generating an invoice which is flowing through the government's portal, which is coming to your portal, which is then going to your customers portal, and it's pre-populating your GST returns. So in that sense, it's this is actually very loosely describing what kind of regulatory frameworks we now operate in, and perhaps this is going to evolve even a great deal in the near future. So in that sense, I feel that regtech companies, we'll see like a sort of a global explosion, a global change in how we do business. And it's not we are going to be in that phase where we talk aggressively about the real time compliance. It's not going to be a post mortem kind of exercise. It's going to become more and more real time. I think that's the very broad way to look at what regtech is going to do.
That is very nice to have broken down the very regtech culture, Preeti. Pulkit, I want to come back to you now and perhaps step back. You in the beginning, if I'm not wrong, you had mentioned when the finance folks come to you and ask, how should I take this decision? You tell them how should you take this decision with less risk. You in fact encourage them to take the decision, but that with less risk. So how do you balance the compliance function with the growth function? Compliance is reducing risk, at the same time, growth is about driving revenue. So what's been your experience?
Another very interesting question, I have to say. And before I start answering, I read a very nice quote. I always use it in our internal meetings. If compliance is expensive, please try non-compliance. So and it sets the tone as well to the answer here. And if you again go back to my initial opening remarks, that two of the 7 principles of compliance is work. It has to be practical, simple, and solution oriented. And second, it should be adding value. Now, these 2 things or 2 principles clearly answer that's how I balance between profits and growth, and on the other side, compliance. And if you ask me as a CFO, the more the growth, the more the compliance risk. So one has to make sure that compliance is never losing its focus. It's always becoming more and more important with more profits and also more growth. In fact, if there are more profits, I would say compliance needs to immediately jump in, because if there are unusual gains, that's also a problem. There are unusual losses, then also is a problem. So from my perspective, the best way to balance is having these two principles embedded in your compliance organization and your compliance strategy. It's an irony, and I would like to clearly mention and vocalize that the compliance is unfortunately associated with corporate constraint and blockages, which I also said a few minutes ago. And I think it's a completely a misunderstood concept. Compliance is not here to stop the businesses. Our compliance is here to help the businesses. Of course, there are some boundaries, there are some restrictions within which we'll have to work, but then we are happy to make it more dynamic and flexible and making it useful to the entire business so that we can still continue to pursue the growth and the profit. But there is tremendous risk, I would say, associated with the businesses if we do not have a clear-cut compliance strategy. And if a company, by mistake, runs in afoul of any regulations, I can tell you it could be in for a rude shock. And the last point that I would say for this is there has to be a clear commitment from the top. And our clear compliance commitment here is we would rather forgo a business than winning it by breaking the rules.
Okay. Well, that's a very important point, Pulkit. But if I can ask out of my curiosity, you say higher the focus on growth, the higher the focus should be parallelly on compliance as well. It is not like a trade-off, if I get a sense. So does that mean that not only are you spending more time on growth, but you are also spending more time on compliance as we go ahead?
Another interesting question, and let me tell again, maybe sometimes we misunderstand compliance. Compliance doesn't jump in once you have grown or once you start to have profit. Compliance is integrated. Again, it's one of those 7 principles, and the first one is having an integrated compliance approach. So from my perspective, compliance should always be standing by us in every decision that we take, in every strategy that we set. It cannot jump in when things go wrong. And when you integrate compliance in every decision making, I don't think you will have this issue of trade-off between growth, profit versus compliance culture.
Okay, nice, very nice. So, Priti, would you have any thoughts and observations on what Ms. Pulkit is saying? And second, of course, if I could quickly ask, what would it mean for the CFOs to hedge the risk of compliance failure?
Sure. There's very little left to be said after that. That nice framework and nice principles around compliance and how it has to flow in an organization. So completely on the page. But from our meetings with CFOs and our understanding of how CFOs see compliance risk, and we've actually arrived at a very basic framework of how we feel CFOs should look at risk. I think the first step really is, as a CFO, do I have a clear understanding of what my risks are? I think that's very, very important to just have a clear and proper understanding of what these risks could be. The second and the most important aspect is, am I able to measure them? So, there may be a risk, but how much risk arises from this kind of a situation? How is it impacting my business metrics? How is it impacting my cash flows? Is there impact on maybe my products, my customers? It could be in any format, but there has to be a measurability aspect to it. So it's very, very important to A, be able to truly understand what your compliance risks are, and B, to be able to measure them. So I'll give you a brief example. So, we conducted a survey of some of our customers. Vendor non-compliance is actually pretty rampant. If you're dealing with small vendors, or if you're dealing even with some of, the medium-sized vendors, if they don't comply on a timely basis, you take a direct hit on how much ITC you're able to claim. In that sense, as a CFO, a lot of them shared this with us, that they're not able to truly measure the impact of this kind of a situation. When we did some analysis, we figured that this could be impacting their working capital by, say, in the range of 7 to 8%. Of course, a lot of them would be in the upper bracket, and some of them would have really truly managed it and be in the lower bracket. But largely, on an average, there was impact on, in fact, their PBT and their working capital. So I feel that the measurability aspect is very, very important. The third and important aspect to be able to hedge your compliance risk and to truly understand how it's impacting you is to create a system of reporting which is able to signal you that there is a risk that is going to arise or that is happening. So I think that kind of warning systems are very, very critical. So you may be able to measure and understand what can happen and what could be the impact, but do you have systems which are able to sort of on a real time basis report to you that look here, this is the risk that you're likely sitting on. I think that those to look at risk and to understand risk and how it impacts you, I think one can sort of broadly use these kind of guiding principle. Of course, adding on to whatever Pulkit said, I think completely on the same.
That was a quite a nice survey, must I say, Preeti. Very, very reflective on the trends that have shown up. Pulkit, you have also stressed in your observations and thoughts about the practicality aspect with compliance. And India Inc. It tends to be seen that there are like a whole lot of compliances that they're sort of are there too, or there's too much of regulation. So in that backdrop, how should one not only comply with the regulation on paper, but also in the practical spirits?
So as Preeti just mentioned, it's impossible to keep a tab of all the regulations which are changing all the time. I was also reading some articles a few days ago. So there are approximately, on an average, 100 odd regulations which are introduced or change every day. I mean, that's crazy amount of information and of course the consequent compliance. It's crazy. Now we have no choice. I mean, we have to abide by the laws of the land. That's given. And of course, somewhere when we do not agree to something, then we go and make the necessary representations to different forums. That's a different subject. But the first and the foremost responsibility is that we are complying with all regulations, internal and external. Once that is clear, again, I like to bring very much an overarching understanding of the concept. And so for me, when you tell me how do you manage these risks, I think that's what basically in short your question is. I would say for me, a traditional and a very useful approach of managing these compliance risks is this famous 3 lines of defense model. The first line of defense is resting with the functions or the respective process owners who are doing the task on a day-to-day basis, and there are management controls which are existing in those departments or different functions. They are the first line of defense. And how are they writing the processes? Again, you go to the 7 principles, and their processes should include and encompass all those 7 principles and what is the compliance culture that they should have in their processes. They are writing and they are practicing those processes. That's my first line of defense. That is the trust, faith that I have in those departments. Number 2, and the second line of defense is resting with those independent functions. And the most popular one is, of course, our accounting, finance, audit, and the compliance functions. They are independently as a 6th or a 5th and the 6th pair of eyes, checking those transactions. For example, again, when you have some purchase orders issued, and then you have materials or the services received, then you have payments, which are in that, of course, coming to the finance function. This is where they then trigger and jump in and say, oh, are things going fine or no? So that's the second line of defense, or second line of protection for me. Third one is coming from the internal audit, which is independently reporting to the audit committees. Now, these are the 3 lines of defense, from my perspective, really help me detect, manage, and prevent and report all these potential or possible non-compliances. Then comes the organization which is sitting outside these three lines of defense, that's the board, audit committee, or the independent board members, and the statutory auditors. And they are completing the entire risk management circle from my perspective. And at every stage, if these three lines of defense are strong, you will definitely get an alarm the moment something goes wrong. And to complete the answer, the RegTech companies would definitely help here install those alarm bells or setting the rules where, when, and how the alarm should be ringing. And then I think from my perspective, everything would be fine. Of course, we can never reduce the risk 100%, but we can reduce it to a great extent if we follow the structure.
Well, 7 lines, 7 principles of navigating compliance, and then 3 lines of 3 defense lines, strong lines that you narrated. You have already set a very strong framework in respect of compliance, I must say, Pulkit. And nice to hear that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Preeti, I'll just quickly pick from Pulkit's last line about the RegTech culture. In the backdrop, of course, where we're seeing the frequency of the regulations increasing, what does the future look like? Where is it headed, the RegTech companies?
RegTech companies have a great role to play in how we manage our compliance. I mean, without doubt, that is coming towards us. Gone are the days when we relied on certain large firms that would give us legal opinions and services, because of course you need them in that ecosystem, and you need them to truly help you understand legal implications. But at some point you need a great amount of technological intervention. I think that now is very widely accepted. That's a thought that we all are getting used to more and more. The other thing that I see happening is that with the help of RegTech, I feel that a large number of businesses will be able to create like a compliant ecosystem. I think that's also going to happen. It's not just about your own enterprise, which is compliant. Slowly, you will see that you want your vendors to be compliant. You want your suppliers to be compliant. There's also the requirement or the need for your customers to be compliant. So in that sense, you'll attempt to create that kind of an ecosystem, which will help you sort of navigate your compliance, which will help you interact with other participants in the network. And we will see like the complete explosion of, how we do payments, how we communicate with our suppliers. Today, your communications with your suppliers could be fragmented because you could be having multiple teams, procurement, payments, finance, and following up with vendors for, their filing statuses, or you may have put in like a robust KYC system or, something like that. But truly speaking, in the future, we can expect that, as enterprises, we will be able to create like a vast network where all of these participants are interacting, they're able to communicate. You'll see payments flow through that network. You will see a large amount of invoice discounting happen. I think those are areas which are still unexplored. We don't truly, as businesses, however compliant or humongous we may be, we don't truly support our suppliers. We may be helping them understand GST laws and we may be helping them comply, but to truly assist them, to help them with their payments, with their working capital, I think that kind of an emergence of that kind of a trend will definitely take place.
So while Preeti continues to be busy on supporting the requirements that she described of those businesses, I mean, Pulkit, where will you be busy down the line? And when it comes to investments specifically for the CFOs, what sort of factors determine in respect of compliance? Yeah.
Thanks, Preeti, for that insight, and thanks, Manu, for the question. Yeah, it's also pretty interesting, and I can tell you it's a tough job these days to simply make any decision, and then you say compliance. Already the heartbeats go up. Let me tell you. I mean, these days, of course, it's possible to also measure it, and you get an alarm there as well. That's also maybe not the RegTechs, but the health techs. And I'll tell you, in the past, I'm not very old, but I mean, the books that I've read typically will look at financial risk, look at operational risk, economic risk, or legal and regulatory risk for sure. But now, when you talk about any investment decision, you have not just financial risk, of course, which includes credit risk, the liquidity risk, and even I would say the customer risks as well. Then you have operational risk, which you have, of course, process part, the legal part, the supply chain issues, then technology risk. I would say this is a new entrant. In the past, none of us will bother about it as a CFO. For us, technology risk would mean, okay, today my emails are not arriving in my email box. So that's fine. Half an hour later, I check it and it's done. Forget it. I mean, I'll tell you my real life example. 3 days ago, my group CFO wrote to me, Pulkit, I hear there is some IT risk that we have. So, we are increasingly concerned about it, and it's not a joke. So for me, this is a new entry, technology risk, IT security risk. We need to be extremely careful about it. Then comes the reputation. CFOs are also increasingly required to be aware of the reputational risk and also the culture and the conduct risk. This is also something very new. When in this era, when we are talking and interacting like this, the culture and conduct risk, from my perspective, even become more important. I mean, our companies, like all other companies, are hiring employees, seeing them like this. We sometimes happen to see them. I mean, I learned about one of the colleagues. I said, okay, how are you? And when will you come to office? And she told me, actually, I've never been. I joined 9 months ago. So for us, this is also a problem. This is also a risk. How do I communicate effectively with them? How do I convey my message? And then comes, I would say, the two more additional risks which we have to consider is political risk. This is becoming another gray area or increasingly difficult area where people find it sometimes difficult to understand. And I can tell you from my previous experience, when I was in the Middle East Africa region, one day we heard that one of the Gulf countries is simply excluded from the Gulf Cooperation Council. And we had our major headquarters sitting over there. And normally it will take 30 minutes to maximum 150 minutes to travel within the Gulf region. And overnight, things changed. And it was taking up to 7 hours to reach a country which would normally take between 30 to 150 minutes. So we need to be increasingly aware of these changing political dynamics. And the last one is the natural calamity risk, or the risk of floods, or risk of such pandemic. So I would say the list is really long, but we do consider, especially in case of some important investments, all these aspects as well. And I can only encourage all the CFOs to be mindful about it if they are not.
Yet another comprehensive answer and very specific to the point, Pulkit. Preeti, do you have any thoughts on the risk for the RegTech for the companies like yours? You have any color on that?
Sure. Yeah. Firstly, I would like to say that, very rightly said, especially in terms of political risk. I think that's the word that nobody in India would have the courage to talk about. I think there's a great amount of political risk and definitely other types of risk that we should be completely aware of. And I also feel as a CFO, like I can hear Pulkit speaking. CFOs, consider themselves as the guardians of the financial data and compliance and all that. So I truly understand his feelings about feeling that anxiety and fear when it comes to regulation. And the only thing I would like to add to that is that especially in the context of India, and when we talk about regtechs, I feel there's a great deal of regulation that is happening at a very fast pace. And I feel, with the coming of blockchain and these kind of technologies, sometimes I wonder if we have enough expertise, and I'm not talking about regtechs, but do we have enough expertise in the regulator for people to truly understand how these blockchain technologies can deliver for us? I think in that sense, our regulator, our decision makers will have to take a leap of faith, will have to sort of completely overhaul their thinking around these concepts. So I feel that's a real challenge that's ahead of us. And we have time to prepare, so there is definitely a large amount of thinking and investment that needs to go into just truly understanding these frameworks and how they can impact how we do our compliance.
Okay. Pulkit, you mentioned, like each sort of risks. CFOs are anyway burdened and saddled with sort of a lot of risk today, or be it operational liquidity, as you sort of outlined. Does the risk of compliance failure shoot your heartbeat the most? On the lighter note?
Yeah, I mean, these days, yes, as I said, I can measure it, so I know, yeah, sometimes it does. But I'll tell you, and this is where, communication plays a very important role. You need to be clear and consistent in your communication. I mean, during this entire conversation, you must be feeling, oh, I never talked about the tax risk. Oh, I never talked about the legal risk. Or I never talked about a particular aspect. No, because I do not want to limit my vision or my insight of compliance or understanding of compliance just to tax risk or a legal risk or a banking risk. For me, it has to be an understanding. It has to be a question of mindset. And that's the reason I expect that what is my responsibility as a CFO and also a compliance manager, that make my expectations very clear, organization's expectations very clear, that how a compliance should be managed, what's my compliance strategy, and then make things work that way. If you have these principles clear, and I think rest of the things are very easy. To now answer your question, it does, but I'll tell you again, in communication, I make it very clear all the time to my colleagues. Please declare the bad news the moment you know. Don't feel scared or don't hide things, and don't let it come naturally. The moment you know, please come and knock the door and tell me that, yeah, this went wrong. Because the moment you tell me, I think the earlier you tell me, it gives me longer time to react to it. So if you follow this, I think then I would say that's the way I try to control my heartbeat. And I think this is what, again, a message that please encourage a culture of speaking up. Please encourage also a culture of reporting without fear. And that would encourage informing the bad events or such non-compliant events as they happen. And this will really give you definitely more time than tomorrow's to really deal with it.
There is a very important point. Communicating bad news by CFOs is I'm sure that will be the toughest challenge that way, Pulkit. Priti, quickly wanting to pick up from the last line of yours, if I can, and that is when you said, India is of course already ahead in the game in respect of regulation, but they, of course, every country with the requirements today, digitization, speed of digitization required to up their game even more. And when that doesn't happen, there's a whole ecosystem, companies, tech, and the entire regulator. Then what happens? Like, how do you sort of then I mean, play your game as a RegTech, because the regulation is is not certain, and the companies are struggling. And now here you are stuck between the company's requirements, so to say, and the regulator. So there have been a lot of regulations on that front. So
Yeah.
how do you manage that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good question you asked. So I'll give you like an example. When the government announced the GST law, it released a set of forms and formats saying that this is how GST compliance will happen. And we had the return forms in our hands. And we actually, built the entire system around it. So we prepared those forms and we were ready to launch them. And when it actually came to sort of filing those returns, everything changed, right? Everything changed. So the return formats, the tables, the structuring, I mean, I'm not getting into the granular information, but just imagine we had a completely different set of returns that we had to sort of implement. The beauty about technology is that you build systems around creating that kind of a technology where you are able to quickly adapt to this kind of a change that happens. So what this means is that if we know that there is a certain notification that is going to happen in the near future, we're already prepared. We truly understand what are the parts of your compliance which will get impacted because of this notification. So we use experts who understand which parts of that entire filing process or that recon process or compliance process will be impacted with this kind of a change, and we are able to implement it very, very quickly. Actually, it may sound simple, but it's a complicated process of bringing that in. What we also do is, because we are completely cloud based, therefore we don't work like some of the large systems, and those are of course very widely used, and they're great systems, for example Oracle and SAP and all of that, where bringing a small change can be a humongous task. So we don't typically we use cloud computing, and we are primarily a tech enabled, we are a tech company, right? So we have more engineers than tax experts. So we have a lot, just imagine, we have more than 1,000 engineers. So in that sense, we are able to implement these changes very quickly, and yeah, we stay young and adaptive and responsive to change, and that's the name of the game. You just have to do that. Yeah, I'm sure if you check with Pulkit, if there is tomorrow there is a rate change, GST rate change, or some other kind of change that is implemented, he'll have to sort of respond to it very, very quickly. He's going to put systems in place and tell his people, and that change will have to be taken care of, because there are, like he rightly said, the cost of non-compliance is very high. So you don't get into that kind of thing.
Okay. So agility helps you control the heartbeat. So that way, the responsiveness, the young engineers, they sort of mitigate and ensure that your heartbeat doesn't shoot up too much because of the uncertainty. Okay, great. And great examples also you shared in terms of, the changes that came initially in respect of the GST regulation. And in fact, then like different changes, different sort of notifications and all those stuff that came in. So before as we draw, in fact, to the last part of our conversation, this fireside chat, Pulkit, what is the main priority in respect of compliance in your mind? Where do you see the future of compliance, and where is your mind headed in respect of it? Yeah.
First thing is definitely we'll have to integrate and all more RegTech companies here in each part of the processes, because as I said, most of the controls in the organization, especially brick and mortar like ours, are still manual, driven in Excel sheets or Word document, or some independent tools or the softwares that we use. So I think definitely I see this is going to be the need of the hour. I'll tell you, a couple of weeks ago, we had a discussion, we changed our authorization matrix. Now, such change in an ideal scenario for a CFO would be really nice. When someone is changing the authority matrix, automatically all the processes, all the systems get updated. Now, just imagine you change the authority matrix independently, and then you circulate, and it goes to different departments, and they assess the impact, and then they are manually changing those independent systems, either manual or computerized. So this is definitely one trend that I see, and more colleagues, people, companies will reach the desk of RegTechs. Second, and the last is that we need to invest in the skill set as well. So I don't know what's your understanding here, Preeti or Manu, but this sort of understanding of compliance risk, I think, is still missing. I'm not saying I'm the greatest compliance manager, but I'm not the only one who should do this. Everyone has to do it. So from my perspective, we need to invest a lot on that skill set, which understand such all-pervasive risk and can immediately alert. So this is the second and the most important thing, I would say. Skill set, investment in the skill set, and investment in technology. I think both have to go hand in hand. We cannot rely just on the computers or RegTechs to do the things. It has to go hand in hand.
Pulkit, a follow-up, in fact, a question of sorts is that you mentioned two important investments. One is the skill and the other is technology. So the how part of it is how you going to achieve it. You said that, but like how you going to identify the right talent, the right skill set, as well as the right technology?
Sorry, I missed that part of the question. I would do, as I said, we need to understand, and again, as part of our compliance strategy, we need to see how we can implement and digitalize our existing compliance process. So that is the one part of it, and this is what I would like to do more and more. There could never be, I would say, a time when we say, oh, now we are done. I think we need to do more and more of it. Second is investment in the skill set. Again, from our perspective as an organization, what we would like to do more and more is focusing on development of these key skills by e-learning platforms, and also making compliance education as part of our learning and development tool. And this would be something I would like to take up personally in next 3 to 5 years, to build on the skill set, as well as also identify the need of digitalization in every part of the compliance management.
And the most important principle of yours that you're going to fall back in 2022 will be?
Most important principle, I would only say again for me, communication. So I would say compliance, for me, the short form of compliance is CPL. And C stands for build confidence, because compliance builds confidence. P is compliance pays back. And L is compliance helps me make logical decisions. So I would only do more and more communication of it to ensure that everybody understands and penetrate this message as much as possible. I think it has to be lived by everyone.
Okay, great, Pulkit. I think that's a great acronym that you have set for yourself.
Thanks.
What is the acronym that you have set for yourself in respect to the future of compliance, and what is your overall vision and strategy and execution in respect of the future of compliance? Yeah.
Right. Well, I don't have any acronym that can that I have ready with me. So, but yeah, I can. I think I can just talk about compliance in the sense of how we see it evolving. I feel that in some years, and very soon, it's going to happen very soon, is that most businesses, most enterprises will start to do real-time compliance. They'll start to see the benefit of real-time compliance. It will no longer remain an activity that happens when your auditor comes after a few months, when your internal teams do an audit and they report. So that kind of post-mortem will not reveal much, but on an ongoing basis you will be able to see what's really wrong and what's really happening, and you'll have greater insights into how you can control that kind of a situation. I think that's definitely coming. Yeah.
Okay. So that is, I think, again, a very comprehensive remark to end this discussion with. But before we sort of officially end this, one word that describes compliance, Pulkit, for you in future.
That's tough one to summarize compliance. But again, actually, I will go back to the same acronym, CPL. Compliance builds confidence. Okay. Compliance pays back. And compliance helps me make decisions logically.
Okay, and Preeti, for you, what is the one word that would describe the future of compliance as?
I think you can totally guess it by what I've been speaking. So I'll just say, when you talk about compliance, you cannot do it without leveraging technology. So just 2 words instead of one: leverage technology.
Okay, great. Well, this is such a great session, full of insights that we had from Preeti Khurana and Pulkit Goyal. Thank you so much to our speakers for this great and magnificent fireside chat. In this Future of Compliance series, we'll continue to have such eminent personalities even going forward. And I would request our audience to continue listening to our great insights in respect of future of compliance, and stay tuned with etcfo.com. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.